Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy New Year. I should probably start there since this is the first time I'm talking to all of you live in the new year. So glad that you're here. You're going to be glad you're here. It's a perfect conversation for us to have at the start of a new year. And so if you're here live, what I hope you'll do first is to say hello. Go into the chat function of whatever social media platform you're on. Say hello. Tell us where you're from. That would be wonderful. Love to have you do that. And for two reasons. One, I'd like to know where you're from, and I'd like to have you say hello. Sometimes there are people here that I know. And so make sure you do say hello. I hope you do that. But the other reason that I want you to do it is I really want you to get used to using those fingers for the next 30 minutes or so. Let your fingers do the walking, as the old commercial used to say, because I want you to engage in this conversation, because when you do, it's a better conversation. Think about it this way. If you were joining my guest and I around a table and we were having a cup of coffee or whatever, I would probably be having tea. If you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it, right? You would do those things naturally if we were around a table. I want you to imagine that we're around a table, even though we're not. And so use the chat. Say hello now, and then tell us what you have in mind, what your questions are. If you do all those things, we'll have a better conversation. It will eventually be a better podcast. And you can see over my shoulder that this will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. It won't come out there until March. And so you are in the know early. In fact, my guest today's book isn't even out yet. I'm so excited to tell you about the book and about him. Let's just go ahead and get started with the podcast. Okay. So, Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Honeybees. Perhaps you've never given them much thought, much less had a chance to closely observe them. And while we won't peer into a hive today, we will learn what honeybees can teach us about being more focused and productive in a distracted world. Those are lessons we all need, whether we like honey or not. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be live in the future when we do this on your favorite social media channel, because they're live streamed first before they get onto the podcast. If you want to find out when those are happening so you can join us and get this information earlier, in the case of this episode, about 2 months earlier, you can join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a new set of tools to create great results for their organizations and team members. That's what Flexible Leadership provides you. You can learn more and order your copy now. Just go to wherever you buy your books, or remarkablepodcast.com/flexible will take you to a link to do exactly that. Hope you'll do that. And now it's time. For some reason,
find setup instructions in the help section of your Alexa app.
My speaker is talking to me, and we will try to get that out of there before the podcast begins. Let me bring in my guest. Here he is. I don't know why the speaker wanted to talk to me, but let me bring up my guest. Let me read a little intro for you, and then we'll dive in. His name is Jones Loflin. He's made it his life's work to deliver powerful ideas and practical solutions to help people make the best choices with their time. Jones's innovative solutions attract the attention of all types of organizations. His client list includes Federal Express, Tractor Supply, and Choice Hotels, as well as the U.S. military and a number of international companies. He's an accomplished author and coach. His books include Always Growing, Juggling Elephants, Getting the Blue Ribbon, and Getting to It. I can recommend all of them highly. He believes the key to success is being passionate about certain things in life, including family, spiritual beliefs, career, and relationships. He lives that passion. You're about to find that out. He lives in North Carolina with his wife, Lisa. They have 2 perfect daughters and 1 really cool son-in-law. And who knows, maybe another son-in-law down the road. His new book, his latest book, is written with Sydney, one of those perfect daughters. It's called Focused as a Bee: 6 Buzzworthy Strategies to Thrive in a Distracting world. Jones, welcome. Glad to have you.
Wow.
We've had the chance to work together, but not on the podcast.
I know. This is so fascinating. And as I was listening, I thought, I should have had my bee suit on today. Because when you gave that opening, said, we're going to peer into a hive today, I thought, oh, this is so cool. I should have a suit on and say, yes, Kevin, we're going outside. Y'all come with me. But it is a joy to be with you, Kevin. I love talking about leadership, love talking about ideas to help leaders grow and thrive. And so just a joy to be with you today to talk about this whole idea of focus.
I love that. Well, so let's do that. So you've written a bunch of books. You've worked with organizations around the world, and now you've written this new book. What's the journey? Because there's a special story to this book. So what's the journey to this book? And now you're writing with your daughter. Why that? Let's tell us a little bit about all that.
Sure, absolutely. And Kevin, I won't spoil it for those who are going to read the book. There's some things that I like people to capture in the story because it is a narrative. And so, about 5 years ago, Sydney and I, my daughter, began talking about we'd maybe like to do a book together. And I'd kind of had a desire to start writing another book. I didn't really know what it would be about. And so it was long by that time
That's an important thing. Like if you're going to write, you got to have a topic. That'd be a good thing to do.
Yeah, Spencer Johnson, who wrote Who Moved My Cheese, will talk about that. He says, don't write a book you haven't lived. And I thought that was so powerful. And so we kind of started just, knocking around some ideas. And about that same time, we started working with honeybees. And so we kind of, just talked, but really didn't connect a book idea with it. And then a couple years later, we started, talking about, bees really have this incredible ability to focus. What would that look like? And what are the principles we're noticing? And we started applying those. And from there, it became, okay, well, I think there might be a book there, but what's the storyline? I mean, you know me, whether it's young elephants or always growing, I write in parable or metaphors. That's my strength, I think. And so I do that. And so what we found was this amazing opportunity to tie into my daughter, Sydney, her relationship with Alicia, someone who loved bees, and to actually talk about what their journey could have looked like in the context of here's this person who's really scattered and surviving. What could they learn from bees to thrive? And so that's a little bit of the journey. And then, of course, as you know, in book writing, it becomes a process. It's a process, and you trust the process, and you write and you rewrite and you get it out there and get feedback, and it becomes better and better. And finally you say, yeah, if we got the right people, and you certainly do, and I do too, in our networks, then we do the Seth Godin thing. We say, time to ship. And so that's where we are.
There is more to the backstory with Sydney and Alicia. Sure. We will not share that because it sounds like you want to hold that back, which is fantastic. Yep. I'm glad for that. And so what was the process like writing it with Sydney, and how would that answer be different if I asked her rather than you?
We actually created a behind the scenes video that asked that very question. And so here you've got this 58. Yes, even though I look much younger, this 58-year-old guy writing a book with his 21-year-old daughter. You want to talk about differences in reading styles? Sydney would prefer to watch a YouTube video or to see a TikTok and learn something, whereas I'm the old guy. I like to have my coffee cup and let's read some pages in a physical book. Those things.
Like you've already named 2 authors of actual books since we started this conversation.
I know. And so what we found interesting was that I would want to put a whole lot of content as far as training, as far as ideas about focus. And Sydney would remind me, this is a story. Dad, you got to keep it light. We want to make sure that the 20-somethings, the early careerists, as my friend David Schmidt calls them, will connect with the message, and it still have valuable information for the CEOs, the mid-level managers who were in their 40s and their 50s. And so what was it like? It was a challenge. And that's why it was so important for us to, at every step in the process, get feedback from other people of all ages and backgrounds to make sure we were staying on target.
So there's 2 things there. One is you wrote with your daughter, which I haven't done, but you wrote for the first time with someone else, I think, if I remember right. And I've done that multiple times. And so I think there's a lot of commonality about writing with someone else. challenges, but great opportunities in doing that. So the book title is Focused as a Bee. And yet you can see, if you're watching, you can see that the word busy is crossed out. Like if we think about, if whether you know anything about bees or not, most people say, well, I'm busy as a bee. So why is the word busy crossed out? Why is it focused instead? Like what's the story there? Like, why isn't this about busy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, enter Kevin Eikenberry, who gave me a thought, as you do many people. You and I were having a conversation a few years ago. I think it was during COVID. Actually, you were so kind, just kind of checking in on other speakers and trainers, and we were talking, and I said the word busy, and you just immediately went, I don't like that word. And I never really asked you about it in the moment because I think it was near the end of our conversation, but that just always kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, what's wrong with busy? What's wrong with busy? What's wrong with busy? And so then as we got into writing the book, then we got to see, people use busy in a very vague term. How was your week? Busy. What does that mean? What are you accomplishing? What are you getting done? And so we started realizing that that's not a positive word because it normally implies a lot of activity without a lot of intention. And
Or
so that,
accomplishment.
or accomplishment.
We were busy, right?
Yeah.
I often say it's the most dangerous 4-letter word in the English language. My grandmother would not have agreed, but I call it the most dangerous 4-letter word.
I should have asked you for that, and we could have put that on the back cover. The most dangerous 4-letter word in the English vocabulary. Darn, Kevin. And the second printing, we'll do that. But yeah, it is this idea that it's just a default for us, that we equate busy with accomplishment, as you said, and focus. And in fact, one of the things that I've had to really narrow my focus about, what is focus? Well, it's the intentional direction of your intention and energy to what is most important. And there's two pieces there: attention and energy. And so that's why we marked out the word busy and put focused, just as kind of a something for readers to go, what does that mean? And then the book, of course, explains it.
And the book does a great job of that. The book is a narrative, a parable, if you will, a story. And so I know that that's how you write. I know lots of people that write that way. And it's a powerful way for us to write and to read. And yet the best parables end up with some very clear points for us, especially if it's being written for the purposes that you built. And so you build this around what you call 6 permissions, and we're going to get to what the permissions are in a second, and that's what will be sort of frame our conversation. But I'm curious why you used the word permission rather than tip or strategy or whatever. Because I think the word permission in this context is really important. So why permission?
Yeah. Full transparency. I think it was probably 3 years ago. I do a weekly video, a Jones Zone, tips on having a better week. And I put something out there about what do you need to give yourself permission to do I think it was to manage your work-life overload or something like that. And it was amazing. I got response from several people who said, I've never thought about it that way, about that I need to give myself permission. Because we wait on others to give us permission. We wait on the circumstances to be a certain way to give us permission. But we have to be the ones to give ourselves permission, because only we know what our values are, our priorities are, our goals are. And so in that context, permission becomes really important. And whether we recognize it or not, and we talk about this in the book, we give ourselves unconscious permission to be distracted.
100%. That's where busy lies, right?
Yes.
So you're talking about focus being an intentional direction of our attention and energy, and busy comes automatically, and it's worn in some cases like a badge of honor. And so if we aren't intentional, what I found as I thought about these permissions is that all of them require intentionality, right? And
Mm.
even the idea of giving myself permission says my default probably isn't this.
Yes.
And within the
Yes.
6, there are a couple that some of you might say, well, that is in my default. That is my natural
Mm.
tendency.
Mhm.
But I'm confident that no one has all 6 of them as a natural tendency. And
Right.
that's why I think this is so great. You may read this, folks, and find some, and you're going to want to read this book, Focused as a Bee by Jones and Sidney Loflin. But I think that as we walk through these 6 permissions, there'll be at least 1 or 2 that will hit you like the broadside, hit you across the shoulder, the head, and say, oh, that's what I needed to hear today. And that's my hope as we're having this conversation at the
Exactly.
start of the new year. But whenever
Yeah.
you're having the chance to hear us, I think that as you listen to these 6 things, one of them is going to speak to you. And I hope that you take action when you hear it. So the first one is the permission to prioritize. And I guess any book that's going to talk about focus, is going to talk about time and talk about distractions, is going to talk about prioritize. What specifically let's do it this way. Tell us a little bit about the connection to bees and prioritization, and then give us a tip about prioritization that maybe we haven't thought about.
Okay. As it relates to honeybees, we think about what is the goal of honeybees? What are honeybees trying to do? And the most okay, go ahead, Kevin. What's the answer?
They're trying to maintain the hive.
That's it. But the average person would say
they're trying
honey.
to make honey.
They're trying to make honey. And that distinction alone is huge. As you know, it's all about the thriving of the colony for another season. So everything is aligned toward that outcome. There's great clarity around that. They don't engage in any activities that aren't aligned with that outcome. Now, if you took the average human being off the street, me even on some days, I don't have all this stuff figured out, and you ask, what is the outcome you are looking for from today? They'd go, get to the next block, to get through my email, we just don't think in those bigger terms. And so prioritizing is all about thinking about what are those outcomes I want to align all my attention and energy toward to accomplish. And so you ask about a tip. I think just stopping and asking yourself that question sometime is really important. What are the desired outcomes I have from today? Whether it's work or personal, relational, and stopping is okay. How can I align my activities like a bee? How can I align my activities today to be in alignment with that outcome? And Kevin, this is no different than Covey, begin with the end in mind. But it's just in the context of bees, is that bees are very clear about this is what we're after. So everything needs to be aligned towards that outcome.
So I don't know if you know this, but did you know that the root word of the word priority does not have a plural?
Wait. I haven't had my third cup of coffee. Say that again.
The root word of the word priority, I can't remember if it's Latin or Greek. Someone will,
okay,
watching may tell us. There was not a plural. In fact,
wow.
You're not going to find any usage of a plural of the word priorities until about 100 years ago. And the usage of it has continued to go up, which is completely connected to the fact of why we need to hear this. And so let's go back to the bees.
Yeah.
This was what I thought of as you were saying it. The first goal, and see, this proves that I read the book, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The first goal is to maintain the hive.
The colony, yeah.
Help the hive to thrive, or whatever.
Hive to thrive, that's what we say, yeah.
And then to make honey. So honey is a part of that, but it's the next one. So once we got one done, then we can work on the next priority. But we don't have 2 at once. We don't have some bees doing one, some bees doing the other, at least not in that. Everything's got to be right around that idea of the hive thriving. And by the way, for those of you listening as leaders, thinking about that in terms of our hive being our team, our hive being our culture, there's another lesson there that goes beyond our conversation today. The second of the permissions is the permission to plan.
Mhm.
How do honeybees, plan?
Uh, Example we share in the book, and your readers or your listeners will appreciate it, is this whole idea of when a hive thinks about swarming, and swarming is all about starting a new colony somewhere else. It's fascinating that a few days prior to them actually swarming, the bees who are going to be leaving, which are of a certain age, they will start gorging themselves on honey, because when they swarm, they have no honey source. And if they didn't eat, gorge on food before they left, they'd starve to death. And that this swarm that's heading out to start a new colony would never survive. I mean, they plan. Another thing about bees, if bees sense that tomorrow is not going to be a day for foraging, okay, the weather's going to be too cold or too wet or too something, then they will actually work more on the day prior, so that they don't lose ground the day they can't go out and forage. I mean, they're just, and it's instinctive, Kevin. We got to stop here and go, bees do it instinctively. We have to do it
Yeah,
intentionally. Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what's one thing, again, and this is the one when I said earlier that some people may almost instinctually or naturally do one of these things. This is the one that I was thinking of, that there are some people that for them, stepping back and planning is almost instinctual for them,
Yeah.
or a natural response for them. What's one thing that you could tell us about planning that maybe we haven't heard or that we haven't thought about in that way?
Sure. We're going to mix metaphors for a moment. My book, Juggling Elephants. When we talk about planning, I talk about in Juggling Elephants how your life's like a three-ring circus, and you've got three rings. You've got a work, a self, and a relationship ring. When it comes to planning, one of the things I think people don't do a good job of is planning as well for their self and relationship areas of their life as they do for work. They spend an enormous amount of time thinking about, how can I be successful at work? How can I accomplish my priority, not ease, at work? We don't think about that in terms of ourself, our personal wellness, or in terms of growing and improving our relationship. So my tip, I'll borrow from Juggling Elephants for that one, is that we need to be intentional about planning for more than just work.
Perfect. My finger clicked to the next one. So if you're watching, you know what the next one is.
I understand.
And this is one of my favorites. And and that is to plan, give yourself permission, to be unavailable. What do you mean here?
Oh, we're so available to everything around us in any moment. I mean, let's start with the obvious, Kevin. We attempt to do work in a workspace, but yet we've got our device close by, and even if it's on silent, it still makes a noise. We still see it. We still think about it. And so permission to be unavailable is about, how do you reduce the stress that's coming from your thoughts? How do you be unavailable to the environment that could distract you? And how do you be unavailable to others? And we chose the word unavailable because it is kind of a word that it packs a punch, especially if you're a leader. Be unavailable? Wait, my team needs me. Yes, your team needs you to be fully present with them because you were unavailable to them the first hour of the morning to plan the things that need to happen and how you're going to best work with them. So that's the idea behind unavailable. Oh, that's right. You need a tip, don't you?
No,
Go ahead.
Well, it's huge. So, but let's first of all, what do we learn from honeybees about being unavailable?
Sure. If you are working with a beehive and you open it up, I don't mean if you jar the box, but if you just genuinely open it up and look down, those bees aren't paying attention to you. Now, there's a few soldier bees that are going to come out and check on you and make sure you're not going to, destroy the colony. But they're like, we got more important things to do than notice these two giants that are ripping off the top of our house. We've got to make sure the colony is thriving. So they don't let themselves be distracted by everything that's happening around them. They stay on task. So that's an example of bees being, unavailable in the moment.
Yeah, this unavailable thing I think is so huge. I wrote a number of years ago, I wrote a blog post that for a long time was my most read blog post. And it was about why leaders should have a closed door policy, because the whole thing is always available. Problem is, if I'm always available, I never have time to think. I never have time to plan. I never have time to do the other stuff that sets me apart or helps me and help my team. So we have to find ways to create this time. And I think maybe this is if you're as a listener, maybe this is the one that really hits for you. And you would say, well, I can't do that, Kevin, because I've got all these things, and I got all these emails, and all this stuff. And I say, you got to figure this one out. Because if you don't figure this one out, you can never get to the level of success and impact that you really want to have. This is critical.
That's true.
So glad that it's on the list.
And in fact, it's one of my two favorite ones. I'll tell you the other one later. So.
Okay. Well, the fourth one is giving ourselves permission to recharge.
Yeah.
In other words, if we're always busy, we never have any downtime. And in a world that's talking more and more about, and people are more open about burnout and these sorts of things, I think this is a really important message. Why do we need to give ourselves permission to recharge?
Yeah, well, it goes back to the distracting thing a moment ago. We're always encouraged to be engaged in activity, to be doing something, and focus. As we talk about in the book, focus drains our energy. Oh, it's exciting to work on that new project or collaborate with the team. It's also draining, and if we're not careful, then we drain so much of our mental energy that we're not ready for that next task or that next team member who really needs our full attention. And so that's why it's important to stop and recharge. Fun fact, in a healthy hive, bees rest more than they work. They actually are changing out, as whether it's like this time of year where it's cold, they're buzzing around, they're flapping their wings to keep things warm, but then they'll rotate out so that other bees will come in and be able to, maintain the heat of the hive or something. But they actually rest more because they want to be fully available for the work that's required of them when it's time to work again.
I think this one for leaders is so important as well, because all during COVID, one of the things that we said all the time was that you can't be at your, give your best to your team if you're not at your best. Like you just can't. It's not possible. So we have to take that time. The last two of the permissions are paradoxical, in my opinion. And so let's start with number 5, which is the permission to change.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by having the permission to change?
When I'm coaching people, Kevin, one of the things I have found is that people continue to do things that aren't working. And one of the most powerful things I can do, I think, for a coaching client is I sometimes am the one to give them permission to change. What would be possible if you looked at this differently? What would be possible if you took this action? I wonder. I'm curious. And it's amazing how there's this dead silence, especially, if it's on a phone call, where they're going, wait a minute, I can think about this differently? I didn't think I could. So, we just get so ingrained into routines and habits that aren't serving us, and we won't give ourselves permission to change because, number one, we're afraid of what the repercussions may be. We're afraid we're going to be bad at it, and we're not going to be immediately successful at this other thing. And then the other thing is we're not patient with ourselves. When it comes to change, we think we immediately have to be good at this next skill or habit or whatever it is we want to develop. And that's just not the case. It takes time for that to happen.
Yeah, I love that. I do love that. And so we need to be able to change, to adapt, to flex, since I have a book called Flex.
Yes.
But here's the thing. The last one is giving so you're saying, okay, we got to be willing to change. But then the last thing that you and Sydney teach us is that we need to give ourselves permission to be consistent. Like, isn't that the opposite of being willing to change?
Really? That, here's my and see, here's the cool part, Kevin. Because this is a metaphor, a parable, you take what's of value to you. You are the first person to offer me that, yeah, Jones, these are kind of a paradox. The reality is that any of these permissions could potentially, rub up against each other. You got to pick the one that's most valuable. To me, you got to give yourself permission to change what's not working and be consistent with what is working.
Yeah, but if you yeah, exactly. And I figured that's where we'd end up, and that's important. So, but now, what is it about honeybees that we can learn about consistency?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any. One of the most beautiful things about our journey with honeybees is just the consistency with which they work. If the temperature hits about 55 to 60 degrees, those bees are out foraging. They're looking. Inside the hive, they're keeping that temperature, the hive consistent so that the brood lives. The honey is drying out at a certain rate. I mean, there's so many things they're just so darn consistent about. The growth as the bees age. Like when a bee is first born, its first job is to clean out its own cell, its own hexagon where it was born. The next thing it does is it feeds other bees. I mean, there's a consistency in process that's just incredible with bees, and that's why they can accomplish so much. Is because they are consistent in what they do.
I love that. So we've been talking about this all along, where both of us have been making connections to your 6 permissions to us as leaders. Are there any other leadership lessons from the book or from our conversation that you would want to draw out or underline for our listeners?
To me, Kevin, one of the biggest ones for leaders is when you're in a leadership position, you may be the one who needs to help that team member with that permission. That I mean, certainly by reading this book, we hope that people, find their own permissions they need to, follow and practice. I think as leaders, it's critical that you're sometimes asking yourself, what is that person not giving themselves permission to do? Permission to fail, permission to ask for help. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. That to me is one of the strongest parts for leaders, is that you get to be the person often who helps provide that permission by the way you lead and manage them.
If you're reading this book or you're thinking about this book, man, I want my team to be more focused. Like, you got to start with you. And if you want to help others give themselves these permissions, you have to be skilled at giving them to yourself, and share your own challenges with doing that. And you do that, you'll be much more successful. Is there anything that, Jones, that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
Anything that you asked that you didn't? No, Kevin. I mean, you really have asked some great questions today. You gave a really good top line of the book. I think the only other thing I would add is that while there's 6 permissions in the book, it's not about necessarily just those 6. It's about, what is the permission I need to give myself right now? For example, the other day, Sydney was doing some working on an application guide for the book, and she said, I just need to give myself permission to be done, to be in, because she just wanted to keep making it perfect, so I think that would be the other piece. Yep.
I love that. So you do have honeybees, and so I'm pretty confident that you do that. I know why that began, and I'm assuming that that's at least somewhat fun for you. What else do you do, Jones, for fun?
Oh, gardening, growing anything. I used to grow kids, but now they're grown, so that part's out of the way. No, I do. I love to see things grow. It just sense of joy about that. Another thing I enjoy is just good conversation, Kevin. I mean, things like today. I love the way you opened up this whole podcast about, imagine we were sitting around a table and I'd be drinking, tea, and of course I'd be drinking decaf coffee. But just good conversation about possibilities, about ideas, and about life. That just really gets me excited, because we don't do that anymore. we're so transactional in conversation instead of being relational. So that's something. The other thing I enjoy doing is travel. I mean, obviously, there's just so much in this world to see, whether it's across town or across the world. So I just love going new places, seeing new things.
I love that. So what are you reading these days?
Oh, glad you asked. I am reading.
This is the only thing you knew I was going to ask you, so here we go.
You weren't supposed to tell them that. I am reading Likeable Badass. It is wonderful. It is how to be a likable badass. It's a book for women. Okay. As a dad of 2 daughters, in fact, I gave both of my daughters a copy to start the new year. I said, I'm going to read this and I want you two to read this because you're going to enjoy it. It's fantastic because it really addresses the challenge for women in how do they gain status in the workplace so that they will be respected for their value and what they bring. And so it's loving the book. I'm about 3 chapters in. It's called Likeable Badass.
We will have that along with other books that have been mentioned during this episode in the show notes, as always, as well as, of course, information about Jones and Sydney Loflin's new book. So, Jones, where do you want to point people? Where can they learn more about you and the book? Where do you want to point people?
Absolutely. First of all, for me, it's jonesloflin.com. Very simply. For the book, just like the book title, focusedasabee.com. You can go there and learn more about the book, see some of the videos that Sydney and I created. You can order the book from the website. We always like that because we get to add a personal touch when that order comes directly to our website versus Amazon or some other opportunity. And so we'd love for you to come do that so that we can provide you some things. In fact, we even sneak in a jar of honey every now and then to some of the people who buy the book. So,
all right, everybody, that should tell you all you need to know about that. And by the way, that is the first time that has ever happened on this show. Is that someone said if you order a book, you might get some honey. Now, there. Listen, how could it be any sweeter than that? So, listen, Jones, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and as I said before, we've had the chance to do some things together before. You helped us celebrate our anniversary a couple years ago with a video, and you've been with us on Virtual LeaderCon before, and so I'm pleased that we've had the chance to do this. But before we say our goodbyes, I've got the question for all of you watching and listening that I always ask, being consistent for you all, and it is the simple yet important question of now what? What action will you take as a result of this? It is my hope that there are plenty of things that you made note of, hopefully with a pen or pencil, but if not, with your brain, about what you're going to do with what you learned, because having and giving yourself permissions, whether it's the 6 we talked about or any others, requires intention, which means that learning it isn't enough. We must take action. And so it is my hope, and I'm sure Jones is as well, that you will take action on what you learned today, not just ordering a book, although I certainly hope you do that. Beyond that, that you will take action on what you learned, turning your learning into a new habit. And if you do that, you will get far more from this than you would have otherwise. And by the way, will have made a difference for yourself and those around you. That's what leaders do. So, Jones, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. Again, Happy New Year, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Kevin. Appreciate the work that you're doing, and look forward to your new book. I'm excited about reading it. I've already ordered it, so we're good.
All right, everybody. So that's this episode, which means, by the way, those of you that are listening to this when it first comes out in the podcast, 2 more weeks before that book comes out, for those of you. And listen, for all of you, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you like. You know what to do with wherever it is that you watch this podcast. Just make sure you come back again next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.